Hey y'all, good morning. Melissa here from Twin Oaks Family Farm in Southeast Ohio, USA. And we're in the meat bird production barn with a flock of Cornish Rock Cross meat chickens that are 34 days old. So in this video, we want to talk about the question, why would you raise Cornish Rock Cross meat chickens? And show you the flock and tell you where we're at in production with them and what's going to go on with this flock over the next week. So this flock is doing great. We had them hatched on September 4th, 2024, and we already had a processing date set up for them at that time of October 14th, 2024. So this is October 7th, 2024, so we're exactly a week from their last day of production. So that question, why would you raise Cornish Rock Cross meat chickens like these chickens, has a really simple, straightforward answer, and it kind of is a right, wrong, pass, fail kind of question, because there really is only one reason to raise these specific chickens. It is to produce poultry. These are meat chickens. They are specialized. So they are a hybrid, but they're not a first-generation hybrid. A first-generation hybrid would be the offspring of, we take one type of bird and we cross it with another type of bird and we hatch those eggs out, and those individuals are the first-generation hybrids. These are not first-generation hybrids. When you've got Cornish Rock Cross meat chickens, the modern meat chicken, this is the result of a really specialized breeding program that combines multiple breeds over multiple generations. Oh dear, I got to show y'all something. Now the lighting's going to change. We're in a shadowed area. We're walking into a sunny area. So I got to show y'all something. This hardly ever happens. And I'll also tell you why this hardly ever happens. So these birds that you're seeing here, like where they should be on the floor and eating from the feeders from the floor, that's usually where you're going to find your 5-week-old Cornish Rock Cross meat chickens. They hardly ever have the agility or the lightness of body to get up to any height. This little bird is actually the exact same age as these birds. It scaled this feeder dispenser. It actually jumped from the feeder tray up to here. We're going to do just a quick rescue. We don't handle the birds very often, actually for their own good. Now and I may not even have to rescue. If that was one of these heavier body birds that got itself in an awkward spot, we would have to. We are want to remove this one because we don't want it to, there he went on his own. So we didn't want him to manure in the top of the feeder dispenser. So we'll try to get a close-up while we're near this one. This bird actually is not going to be successful in the flock as a meat chicken. It will not go to the butcher for processing when the rest of the flock goes in a week. I don't know if you can see it there. This bird, whoa, it's quick. That bird actually has, I'll try to find him again, but that little bird that we were looking at actually has a deformity. Here. Okay, and you might get a look at it there. You can probably at least tell the face looks somewhat awkward, okay? So that bird has a deformity that could have been at hatching caused by genetics or could have been from injury, but if you get a good look at its face, and there we can actually see the bottom beak sticking out to the right. So the bottom beak and the top beak don't line up. We call that scissor beak. Now, I also can tell though, looking at that bird and evaluating it, the scissor beak, really greatly impacted that bird because the bird has some size and stature to its legs and feet. It didn't attain like the size and stature of the legs and feet on the typical birds in the flock, but it would have had a lot more size than it has if it didn't have that scissor beak. And so the scissor beak quite obviously causes a difficulty to some extent with eating and drinking. In many cases, it can cause such a difficulty with eating and drinking that the bird actually can't stay hydrated and nourished. This bird obviously is not putting on weight, not filling out, not ever going to attain the size of these other birds. But it is eating and drinking enough to have energy and be perky and have agility and strength. So we've let that bird stay in the flock I've said before, when we've shown that bird in a typical meat bird operation, as soon as that scissor beak was observed, that bird, I would imagine, would have been an automatic cull. But the size difference is unbelievable. I mean, that bird is the very same age. These birds are 5 weeks old. That bird's the very same age as all these other birds. It's just tiny because that scissor beak definitely impacts the quantity that it can consume. But it is, as we said, consuming enough to sustain its life function. So we've let that one stay in the flock. As I mentioned, it won't be a success in terms of meat production. We won't even take that bird to the processor when this flock goes to the processor. But we'll have to decide then what we want to do with that little bird, if it will remain here kind of as a pet. That's really never happened for us with any of the meat birds. So we'll cross that junction when we get there. But we were kind of emphasizing how this is a hybrid that these birds that you're looking at may be like 7-8 generations down the line from the original cross, or the original sets of crosses of birds of different breeds. And there's probably 2 to 4 breeds involved in the modern Cornish Rock Cross meat bird genetic plan, breeding program. And I kind of liken it to, like, it's kind of a proprietary thing. The hatcheries, as far as the specifics on the breeding programs, it's kind of proprietary information. In other words, if you're not in the inner circle, you don't have the formula. For example, it makes me think of Pepsi Cola. So if you compare Pepsi and Coca-Cola, I believe Pepsi foams more, and that's because there's a foaming agent included in the recipe for Pepsi that isn't included in the recipe for Coca-Cola. And a chemical plant actually in the Mid-Ohio Valley makes the foaming agent that goes into Pepsi, and it's proprietary to that, to that entity, to whoever holds that recipe. So for the foaming agent, so it's it's just a foaming agent, but how to make the foaming agent is proprietary information. So these are specialized meat birds. How to exactly set up the breeding program to end up with these birds is proprietary information, and it's more or less held by the hatcheries. Is sort of the way I interpret it and understand it. Okay, nice rooster here. Another nice rooster here. We get straight run birds. If you're familiar with getting chickens, straight run refers to a flock that includes males and females. Okay, so but that is the answer to the question: why would you raise Cornish Rock Cross meat chickens? Specifically to produce meat. If you want birds for a breeding program, if you want birds for egg production, if you want a bird for a pet for a long time, these aren't your birds. I would not recommend Cornish Rock Cross meat chickens, because they are specialized for a very specific purpose. It's to raise them for a short amount of time and then have them butchered and processed into poultry. So really, you can achieve that with Cornish Rock Cross meat chickens in about 6 weeks. You can also try to have a production system where you raise them for maybe 8 or 9 weeks. We don't recommend that. We would never do that. We don't ever want to have a meat bird on farm over 6 weeks old. So for us, the max out point is definitely 6 weeks. We are even still trying to work toward, if we could finish a flock successfully in 5 weeks and have the size birds at the end of it that we want, we would do that. So I guess short story of that is, if we could make all of the ambient living conditions totally perfect and totally ideal to their preferences all the time from start to finish, I think we could finish them in 5 weeks. But the fact of the matter is, we have a rustic type barn that is subject to whatever the outdoor conditions are to some extent, and these birds, Cornish Rock Cross meat chickens specifically, are very sensitive to ambient conditions. They're very sensitive to temperature impacts, humidity impacts, floor quality impacts, lighting intensity impacts, and all of these things are influenced by the weather to some extent. So with that in mind, it takes us about 6 weeks to finish a flock of meat chickens in our production system to the size that we want. And so when I say the size that we want, what we're going off of is I'm not necessarily aiming for a pound measurement on the live bird. I'm aiming for what size whole chicken am I going to have in the freezer after I process the birds in this flock. And I want to get basically uniformity across the flock size-wise while they are live birds, meaning that when I look throughout the flock, basically all the birds are about the same size and attain about the same size over production. Now, naturally, roosters or males will grow a little faster and get a little bigger than our hens do, okay? So there's a rooster standing at the water. There's a rooster standing there like preening, cleaning feathers. There's a rooster sitting down. There's a rooster standing up behind him. Let's try to find some hens here. Okay, so here's a hen sitting at the feeder. Several of these birds laying at this feeder are hens. Actually, all the ones that we're looking at right there are all hens. So even here, I mean, I see a little bigger size in the roosters, but okay, looking at these birds, the two closest, the one on the right's a rooster, the one on the left's a hen, they're about the same size. Okay, so we've got good uniformity of growth in the flock, across the flock, amongst the birds. Same there, hen on the left, rooster on the right, looks good. Feeder full of birds back there, love to see that. You saw Scissorbeak, the one that got up in top of the feeder, so you know that's an atypical individual, an example of one that's too small. But like I said, point of this concept, you know, we go on a 6-week production schedule. We don't want meat birds longer than 6 weeks. If you online search, you know, how long to raise meat birds, I can almost promise you're going to come up with like 8 weeks, 9 weeks. We don't go by that. We did the very first couple flocks we did like 5 years ago and several thousand birds back. We did try to go like the 8-week production cycle, and it ended up not really working out well. And that's when we started shortening up after that, and we arrived at 6 weeks. So in our production schedule, we do use a barn system. That's for protection for the birds from predators and protection for the birds from extreme weather. So it works for us. There's other ways to raise them. There's an example of a female that's a little light. She's a little lighter than uniform in the flock, but that's okay. She's got another week to grow too. So a lot of these birds, you know, fill out, well, virtually across the board with meat chickens. The last 8 to 10 days of your production cycle after you hit 5 weeks, they are going to fill out a lot, okay? So, and then one of the reasons, kind of diverging here into a thought, but one of the reasons we don't like to raise them beyond 6 weeks, regardless of the feed schedule or the production system, is because after about that time, after about 6 weeks, they continue to have the heavy appetite, but the rate of growth plateaus out, levels out. And so what we see like from week 5 to week 6, say, is their appetite does increase, but so does their rate of growth. We see them like fill out the most where they're distributing feed to meat in their bodies. We see them fill out the most kind of in that last 8 to 10 days of a 6-week production schedule. So if you keep going beyond that, that rate of growth actually kind of flattens, but they're still wanting as much feed from you as they did when their rate of growth, you know, was increasing. So the point for us with meat chickens overall is to maximize growth potential, minimize flock loss. So, you know, at their ages and stages, in the beginning, we want to see them get a good start, get good immune system functioning, good organ function. In the middle, we want to see like their legs and their feet grow, and we want to see them kind of bulk up as far as their skeletal structure. And then in that last 2 weeks, that's basically where we're seeing the cuts of meat pretty much develop on the bird. So as I said, that's what we're looking at and evaluating and gauging as we're raising these birds. We're saying, okay, are we getting to the place where when we have these birds butchered and processed, we're going to have about a 4.5 pound bird in the freezer if we left them as whole birds? And this flock is right on track. One of the ways we do that is we have a target feed consumption rate that we figure on 10 pounds of feed per average